Bart, welcome to the fourth episode on how to plan your kid's career. The previous episode on where must you take your kid, either to a union, a university, or overseas, created a lot of discussion and everything. And now the majority of all the parents says no, they must go overseas. But it is not that easy to take your kid overseas and to ensure that he gets to a club or to an academy that will develop him enough to become an international player. And by meaning an international player, one of the major countries. I mean, to play for Georgia or to play for Kazakhstan or Waziristan, I don't know. It's not really becoming a great rugby player. And I don't know if it's that viable, financial viable to achieve this. You just mentioned in a previous program about the changes that Brexit has caused. You want to explain to us?
Yes, Carl. So one of the influences on the contracting model from the UK specifically. So someone with a European passport could get into the UK easily. Now with Brexit, if you want to go to England, you're probably going to have an English passport, so that's the one difficulty. So for someone to get contracted into the UK as a junior player, your options are going into an academy, invited into a junior academy, which is very tough as it is already. They've got very well structured academies at the clubs, but it's very tough if you don't have ancestry. So that ancestry means that you either have into your parents directly has got to have a passport for that country, or one of your grandparents directly related to you. Only other way is by means of 75% or more Super Rugby matches that you have played over a season, or the period that you were at the South African club, or then being an international for South Africa. And like I say, coaching-wise and player-wise, at this stage, Brexit actually makes it even more difficult. So not throughout Europe, because the French clubs are still very open-minded. They are looking at good youngsters in France and also Italy. They are not that reliant on ancestry or passports, and they still take in good youngsters that side. Although they, especially France, are also under some pressure, or local pressure, to make sure that their own young players get opportunities and doors are not closed for them. And that is why they drive a lot to get players in there as young as possible now, so that he can actually play for France or for Italy in 5 years' time. If he gets in there early enough as a 18 or 19-year-old, the options are much better. But still, it is still limited. It's not that anyone that wants to go there would really come right. I mean, we've got a couple of players in South Africa, even with the right passports, of European descent, that has played even in our under-20 national final that's been involved there, that is not being looked at the moment. So one would reckon, but you know, if you're that level junior youngster in South Africa and you play at that level, one of the, let's call it the top 30 players in the South African national competition, is not a given anymore. So they are very clued up in terms of the way that they source players, because they also want specific players. They know that the South African bulk and beef boys are the big locks. We've got really physical players, but that's also athletic. That's the way that we are brought up, and the way that we play our junior schoolboy rugby is very expansive, boys getting good skills to boot with their size. So those are players that's favoured. Our props are really favoured in Europe, but that's basically where it stops. You got very good competition from skillful young players abroad there as well, and it's becoming a lot tougher. There are opportunities. So if you look at the other end of the scale and say, okay, but in recent times, for example, Russia's got quite a big drive to acquire good young talent with the idea, I think very much in the mold of what Italy has done. I think if you look over a period of the past decade, there's probably about anything between 15 to 20 just South African players that has played international rugby for Italy with success. It has unfortunately not made them a world beater still. I mean, they've still always battled for the wooden spoon in this, even the Six Nations. And Russia is also starting a similar drive now where they have opted to look at good youngsters from South Africa with the idea of nationalizing them. So getting them over there, they're giving out or have been doing some very good junior contracts. They're paying the boys in dollar, and tax are not the player's responsibility, which makes it financially a good option. But you've got to go to Russia. You've got to understand that you're going to play in a northern hemisphere country that is probably even worse off weather-wise than Europe, and a lot different from European countries in terms of your social environment, huge travel distances, even just for normal league games, etc. But if that is something that you would look at, there are some possibilities, also not hundreds of them. I reckon there was in the past year probably about anything between 10 and 15 youngsters contracted into Russia, and there are quite a number of ex-Super Rugby and Senior Currie Cup rugby players actually playing in Russia. And then again, you've got to make sure that you end up at the right club. There's certain clubs that you probably have to stay away from, in the sense that it just doesn't make sense rugby-wise for you to go there. So some of the Russian clubs are actually participating in the European leagues. So a lot of homework that needs to go in there. You need someone that can advise you which of the clubs are the right clubs. We've got a couple of very good South African coaches involved with the frontline clubs in Russia. And therefore we know that coaching structures at some of these clubs are good. But yes, they are the one. I've also heard about some of the other European countries, lesser known countries like you've mentioned, Georgia, that are looking at doing the same. So all of these guys want to strengthen their foothold and get in good junior players that they might be able to use in the next World Cup or two, for that matter. I would reckon that you would see very few of those players hanging around for 5 to 8 years playing that side, unless, and there are some of our senior players in Russia that's been playing there now for a couple of years. It might happen. I don't think you'd get big numbers. It might be a transitional phase for a youngster to go there and just have some good life lessons. Live the life there, play in thick snow, in ice, travel on a train when it's minus 15 degrees, etc., etc. That might not be bad for a youngster to do that. But you've got to make sure that it's a sensible rugby decision. But then again, if you can combine the two, and he can go and play a little bit of good rugby, and there's some coaching staff that can develop him a little bit, it's not a far-fetched thing. But not every club in Russia, not every club in Georgia, etc., really makes it a good option.
But the more, and we foresee that more and more of our junior players will go overseas. The more that wants to go overseas, the pickier the European clubs are going to become. And I mean, it's nice to go and play in Europe and earn 20 or 30,000 rand per month. You're playing for a second-tier French team, or in Georgia, or in Russia. But at the end of the day, isn't it similar to go and play for the Volker, where you won't be seen? I think because we're discussing planning the career of your superstar. Is it really a pathway to a Springbok rugby jersey?
Those are the big questions that we've been asking the last couple of months, Skull. If you talk about the next level of exposure for good youngsters in South Africa, that's where you need to go. You need to go to the Falco or SVD, EP Kings now, bouncing back into the senior rugby level in South Africa again, hopefully. Leopards, etc. So there are some very good options for youngsters there, especially if you look at the success that we've had in the Leopard system with Picker. That has really been pushing through very good young talent that's played in their junior structures over the years, and then also eventually got exposure at the Picker and Varsity Cup, etc. So that in itself has always been a very good system for me. And now you've got Andre Pretorius in charge of that system from Picker, going over into the Leopard system. So they're really trying to keep the coaching development as solid as possible, and that is what is important. The Falker over the last couple of years, have had some good coaches. There's some good players that's come through. You always have a question of depth. Do they really make it playing against bigger teams? Sometimes they're very competitive. Even beat the Lions at Super Sport Challenge level. Those teams often are quite competitive once they get a good unit going. I think they are very limited at the moment. We spoke about their contracting models and how many players they can contract, which limits them even more than in the past, which we think is unfair, because my thing now is not only about the clubs that are weakened or these smaller unions that are weakened. It also takes away another development opportunity for players to go to and go into a system where he is guided and taught by Jimmy Stonehouse at the Pumas. So the Pumas are not a franchise that's allowed to push a under-20 team into the upper echelons of our national competitions, for example. Shouldn't that be one thing that we should push for? So if SARU is worried about consistent development from out of that region, you've had good coaching staff there, Brent, Jimmy, to mention but a few that's come through that Puma system, Mens and those guys, very good coaches. Crick, so there's been good coaches there, but isn't that a way to assist our junior development system, is to make sure that they've got a team that can actually compete and play down there? So that's our question that we're constantly asking, and that is why parents are looking at alternatives outside of South Africa, because where do I take my rugby player to now? If not in South Africa, any opportunity, then a Pro D2 or a lower level club situation. I mean, youngsters in the Russian setup earn very good salaries for junior players. If you compare it to South Africa, it's a question of, would they be able to endure the personal circumstances, and is it a good rugby decision?
Question. Wandisile Simelane. would you send him to any club in Europe, including the UK, which is not a top club, to develop?
The only real benefit now would be the fact that we actually have a component of 4 teams that's going into Europe now. So now one could reason, go and experience the circumstances, get used to playing on soggy fields, playing in very cold conditions, training in very cold conditions, getting used to the pitches that is slower, that's not really conducive to the kind of rugby that we are playing in the Southern Hemisphere, fast pitches and exciting running rugby. So that might be the only real positive. Someone like Awandi, I honestly don't see that you would want to send him there to play lower level rugby just to experience that, rather than keep him in your system and develop him here and make sure that he actually develops and the areas that needs development are actually developed. But again, it's got to be sensible. No point also in keeping a player because he is very talented and you want to hang on to him, but you're not really taking him to the next level. But if I had a choice for his sake, as we're sitting here, go to Europe, play in a lower level competition, or stay in South Africa and play here, no doubt that he's in the right place right now.
All right, now we're going to the next level. I'm not going to name names. We discussed one of the players before the program. They're not really good enough to form part of 5 or 6 top players per union in South Africa. Will you send them to go and play in second-tier teams in Europe and earn a decent living for 8 or 9 years? Or would you keep them in South Africa?
Carl, the very difficult situation that we have now is, and it's not just a question of move kids out of the country for the sake of earning a little bit more money and having longevity in his rugby career, even though it's not at a high level. That's not the thing. Is that we have very limited opportunities. So even if we have, and we do have certain strong clubs in South Africa that's really doing well, that is giving exposure to youngsters, and even some of them coming through there, the clubs are not rigged and equipped at the moment to really do a development role. And it's not their fault. They've got limited resources. They coach to win at the top level. They need success. So they don't really have the sources and assistance to really develop very promising youngsters and take them to the next level, because it's not within their scope. So it's not their fault. I know they would love to do that. So club rugby in South Africa is driven largely due to privateers, people with money getting involved, really love the club over years, and we assist where we can, but it's all short-term stuff. So things don't work out between me and the club, or I'm not happy and I'll just take my money and I'll walk away the next season. So there's no longevity. We had a wonderful situation actually with Platinum Mines and Impala Rugby Club that is actually, I think, at one point won 4 out of 6 seasons finals as a club in a national competition in the Gold Cup, because you had some longevity in the sponsorship deal with the mines that actually paid players some money and also involved them into occupational positions in the mine, and then they could play rugby. So that's probably the only club in South Africa that's in that position. Unless you go now to universities where you could have students that study for 2, 3, 4 or 5 years. But that is a very volatile situation because the students don't always get the necessary backing that they need from the unions to make sure that they also pass, and they're not really held responsible to do so. So we've got too many examples, and we keep on bragging about this myriad of players that's come through the Varsity Cup system that became Springboks. I don't want to hear any names. I want to hear whom of them completed their degrees. Then you can say they've been part of a successful system. To bring them and say this Springbok has played Varsity Cup rugby for 1 year, it's absolutely no point. If he's done that to go and get extra exposure. So our system of development, to answer your question, is really in question in South Africa at the moment. I don't see us really putting systems in place. We've got an explosion of academies and every second institution starting their own new thing, and there's probably 20 of them going now, of which I really only would probably back 2 or 3 at the most. They're not good enough. If you compare them to the club and national academies in Europe, they've got a solid system going for years. Those players are all monitored from the lowest level right up to national level in most of those countries. Numbers are controlled. Each and every one of that player is in a development system, sensible development system. We don't have that. So to answer your question, you cannot blame parents saying, but I'll even go for a lower level opportunity outside of South Africa now because I don't see a future here for my kid. Not necessarily those high flyers that's been the Jan-Hendrik Wessels and the ones that stood out for the last 3-4 years, not them. They will be sorted at most unions. It's about the number 2s and 3s and 4s who's actually the future and the depth of our rugby. The Carl Brinks that were never a standout junior rugby player in South Africa, that tagged along with his mates to the Lions, got a junior contract, and eventually became a Springbok in South Africa. So those players will now be missed. They're not going to be involved in good development junior systems.
All right. To sum up the whole situation, players like Wandisile, Jan-Hendrik, if they get an opportunity at a top club overseas, yes, you can avoid the contractual limitations and everything that's been placed on the juniors or under 27, I've read. So yeah, for your second tier people, I think we must see it as a gap year. If he gets an opportunity, you must see it as a gap year for 1, 2, 3 or 4 years. And then come back to South Africa and qualify yourself, get a bit of financial gain. But out of a second tier club in Europe or going to Russia at this stage, I mean, everything could change. I don't see that as part of a pathway to become a superstar.
Yeah, Carl, I agree with you. It's got to be part of a very sensible decision where anyone advising a youngster to do so must be in conjunction with opportunities that side. So what are the opportunities as a junior coming into your system? Who are the coaches involved at the club? Who are your conditioning staff? How does the coaching structure at the club look? Do you mentally look after the younger players? Because it's going to be a huge test for him surviving there. So at the same time, you would probably find it slightly easier to get a gap abroad, slightly easier than to get into a union contract in South Africa. Probably not slightly, definitely easier. But it's got to be a well-calculated thing that it's not only aiming for a good income, solid contract. It must be if you want it to be a rugby decision, it's got to be a rugby decision first and foremost. Then you worry about the rest. So yes, proper research needs to be done by the parents, by people advising these youngsters to make sure. I honestly believe that 90%, 95% of all of these youngsters that accepted contracts now in Russia will be back in South Africa quite soon, and not because they don't enjoy the rugby, because most of them are actually contracted into good rugby environments. It's going to be the social, mental challenges that they experience there that's going to bring them back. And the question then is, where is he going to slip back into the system here if he's been there for a year, totally out of view and out of sight?
All right, so the grass is, what do they say? It's not always greener on the other side of the fence.
It looks greener, but once you get there, you stumble over the anthills as well.
I think we want to change it to most probably not greener on the other side. So if you want to take your kid overseas, think very careful about it. I think, again, but be honest with yourself regarding the talent that your kid's got. Will he make it into a proper international team? And then make an honest decision.
Absolutely, Carl. And like I say, I can't reiterate that enough. It's got to be part of a future decision. You've got to have a 3, 5 and a 10-year plan that you sit down and talk to your kid about where do you find yourself over 3, 5 and 10 years. And if rugby doesn't work out, what then? So that we don't get there after 8 years and we've fallen around amongst minor and kind of opportunities playing in Spain. What a wonderful experience for a youngster to go to sunny Spain, hang around there, beautiful European country, but with their top leagues not even comparing to our top clubs in South Africa, you know. Is it part of his life experience? Is it his gap year or two, or is it for rugby? So that's what I'm saying. You can get lots of players into Germany, into Spain, and places like that even. Does it make sense? What does he want to get out of rugby? That's got to be part of the planning process.
So yeah, thank you so much. I hope you guys really take Bart's opinion and his advice to heart. Thanks a lot.
For Stadio, a qualification isn't just a qualification. It's more students inspired to reimagine their possibilities. With 5 faculties, 10 campuses and over 50 accredited qualifications, undergraduate and postgraduate studies, contact, distance and blended learning, we're transforming higher education into something that's truly multi-faculty, multi-campus and multi-mode. Stadio, a new vision in higher education.